Welcome to Public Comment. I'm John Dunbar, former mayor of Yountville.
And I'm Alfredo Petroza, former Napa County supervisor.
With us today, former City of Calistoga Mayor, Christopher Canning. And we're going to talk about politics, people, and whatever else is on our minds. We could not serve our communities independently nearly as well as we did collectively.
I'm going to see you in the grocery store. I'm going to see you on the street. Let's talk about this.
Public and civic service has to be part of life.
Chris, welcome.
Thanks,
and
John.
Thank you for being our first live guest.
It's Christopher, by the way.
It depends on how much trouble I'm in, but I feel so honored not just to be here with you two, but to be your first guest on here because
By the way,
I know you slid me up the list quite a bit because there's quite a waiting list of people wanting to be here
It's a long
in
list.
this chair.
Well, it's like the NFL draft. You know, there were discussions, and you moved right up the draft board.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Does that mean I get the highest pay because I'm first, or how does this work?
You get
We
the
didn't
most
discuss-
we have ever paid anyone to be on our podcast.
I want double.
Okay.
So we have zero sponsors and there's zero money being paid to anyone, just to be clear. But I think part of it, John, we're 10 or 11 episodes in, I forget already. But I think part of what we heard is people want to hear from guests. They want to hear from other people. And I
That's not
can't,
because they were tired of hearing from you two, right?
some more than others. I'm not going to mention who.
All right, we'll leave that alone.
But what I would say, though, is I do think it's pretty cool to have Chris, right, as our first guest. Not only were both of you mayors, but I think we're all friends, right? And I think people lose sight of that. They think that we're in these jobs, because we're, we have titles next to the business card. I don't think I ever ordered business cards, by the way. But
Thanks for saving the taxpayers some money.
Totally.
Appreciate
But
that.
I think there's this friendship that, to me always stood out with you, Chris, whether we're dealing with earthquakes, fires, pandemics. I knew that you were a friend at the end of the day. You were a mayor, but you were a friend. And I think, before we get into some of the fun stuff, and maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself. Not everyone knows who you are. We know you. Some more information than we'd like sometimes, but well, we know you.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I completely agree. I'm only on my second glass of wine because John's being a little stingy today on his wine sharing. But, just give the public a little bit about your background, how you got here. You went from corporate America maybe to public office, and then you're now doing your own thing as a consultant too, which I think is awesome. So
Born and raised in New England, a
You get
small
3
town.
minutes, by the way.
Okay, ready to go. Born and raised in a small town in New England, Connecticut specifically, called Beacon Falls. 4,000 people, 6,000 dairy cow. Couldn't wait to get out of there. It was a fun place to grow up. And then through a series of events, ended up being transferred to Calistoga from overseas for a 3-year assignment, and that was 19 years ago.
damn.
So yeah, I spent my formative years, if you will, with Nestle, major, multinational organization. Kind of got raised in that, and then when I ended up in Calistoga, I was supposed to transfer out of there back to the East Coast, and decided to stay. Took over as the head of the Chamber of Commerce and Visitor Bureau.
Now, did you know you want to be in office then or no?
No, not at all. I didn't. I never actually wanted to be in politics, or never gave it much thought. But I used to have weekly conversations with my dad on the East Coast, and he found me complaining more than he was comfortable with about, certain things that were going on in the city. And his exact quote was, "Shut the fuck up or get involved."
Not only your
I can
dad,
swear,
not only
right?
your dad thought that, others thought that too.
Yeah. So to spite him, I ran for city council, never expecting to be elected because I wasn't from there. And I was only living there maybe 3 years at the time.
Wow.
Served my first 2 years of a 4-year seat on council under a mayor that had different values and approach than I did. So decided to run for mayor, never expecting to get elected to that role. Got elected then, and then ended up serving 5 terms, which
Wow.
unfortunately, in some of these up valley cities and other cities in California, 2-year mayor term is what's there now. It's certainly not efficient because you're always having to consider the next term. But was, the good people of Calistoga ensured that
Wow.
I was there for a total of 10 years. And
It's a long time.
that was 10 years of fun and
Earthquakes,
enjoyment.
Pandemic,
Earthquake,
fire.
wildfires, evacuations, a pandemic, COVID. But I will say, on a serious note, that while all those activities, normally if one of those activities happens in a 10-year term, that's a lot to have them all. We all went through them together, and that's what built our friendship. And to this day, I'm out of office, you're out of office, you're out of office, the three of us. I still consider you to be some of my better friends by far in the Valley because of what we've been through and what we've experienced.
Yeah, well, I think 2 years ago with the Great Wine Capitals, the boondoggle that everyone talks about, but it's actually a very informative trip being part of the international wine regions. You learn so much, but we were in Switzerland a couple of years ago and we're texting and you're like, I'm in France. I'm like, okay. And they're like, well, I can jump on a train to meet you. And we met each other for a cup of coffee and then we went to a dive bar. But it was like, and this was, you're out of office, but it was this friendship. Like I wanted to see my friend. I hadn't seen you in a while.
Exactly.
And I think that gets lost in translation sometimes. People think these jobs unite us. They do maybe, because I wouldn't have met you guys if it wasn't for the positions we had. But then we became friends and we learned to respect each other based off the hard work. And I didn't always agree with both of you. I think you guys were wrong quite a bit. But it was this mutual.
That county on high voice coming down to
You can't let it go.
Yeah,
but it was this respect that we had for each other. But I do think, like when people think of mayors and they think of supervisors, they always have more deference towards mayors because the positions just sounds better. I won't say that
it's also
often.
because nobody knows what a supervisor
Agree.
does.
They're all, are you the supervisor for like the roads department? I was like, no, we're the supervisor for the county. And they're all, but the mayor, they're important. I'm like, God damn it.
John, understand that across the world,
agree.
Mayor is a familiar government position. Not everyone has counties. Not everybody has districts or other titles. So people do respect mayors significantly more than supervisors, I think. No.
There's a great book out called Mayors Run the World. I have yet to see the publication that says supervisors run the world. So I'm just going to have to go.
Look, the numbers aren't fair. It's 2 against 1. Like, we shouldn't go down that path.
What I will say, though, to be still playful, but honest, is we can't do our jobs well without each other. And the three of us really did bond together as colleagues as well as friends.
Yeah.
Partly because of the crises that we had to deal with. I mean, we knew we could count on each other, whether it was earthquake in 14, wildfires in 20 and 17, pandemic for 3 years and counting. We could not serve our communities independently nearly as well as we did collectively.
Great.
And we served on boards together, right? And I'll say this, but I trusted both of you, and I trust both of you, right? And, like when we had to do things, when we, the Climate Action Committee, because we all love to joke around with it, the three of us created it. But when we knew...
We actually did create it on a call between the three of us.
And let's double click on that. But you all remember, like, hey, we have to do this. And it sucks, right? Because you're all like, what are we going to do? I was like, I have no fucking idea, but we have to do this because the community wants this, right? And again, people labeled us as non-environmentalists, non-climate folks, but we did it. And we had that call of like, hey, this is the right thing to do for the community. Business, Joe Smith, Jose Hernandez, it didn't matter, right? We did it. And I think that doesn't get, talked about because it's what we did. And I think we all trusted each other enough to say, look, we don't know where this is going. Because it was a little bit of a leap of faith to say, what are we creating? Can it get weaponized? Can it get used against us? But it was the right thing to do.
At the end of the day,
true. Yeah.
If ever an energy is going to be exerted, there better be a positive.
Yeah, but like I think that's part of the job, and not that we want to look backwards, right? But I think that's what united us a little bit. Of we were willing to take a risk, but it was based off trust. That I knew it when the going got tough, right, and the cameras were off and the press conferences weren't there. We were all going to row, and when we had to make decisions like, hey, how do we fund this? We all had to go back to our jurisdictions and say, hey, we got to do this. Right. And I think the public doesn't see that sometimes.
Yeah.
I like to tease Chris for the time during the 2017 wildfires that Calistoga was closed to all
His exact
tourists.
words were,
"You're not welcome here." And I tease him only
That's
because
out of context, but go ahead.
that's what makes it funny. It's out of context.
very hurtful.
I know. But, I have that right mayor to mayor. You couldn't say this.
Yeah, very true.
But I still remember and love to tease you about this when you're standing on, I think it was regional, if not national news, telling people you're not welcome here. And of course you meant because it's not safe because of the wildfire threat and all that. But at the same time, you're standing there on the sidewalk on Lincoln Avenue, and there's a traffic person writing a ticket to a car that's parked illegally on the street. And I'm like, this is awesome. It's such a great message.
He was enforcing the fact that you are not welcome currently.
I
And of
thought
course
you staged it. It was so perfect.
Yeah, the irony of that is, Calistoga since 1863 has been known for its hospitality
Yes.
and welcoming. But at that point, at the moment in time, it wasn't safe for people to be there.
Well, look, I give you credit. You had the courage to say that. You felt the conviction in that moment to say that. I thought it was funny as hell, right, when I watched it. But that carries over, Chris, into some of the things you did. Like when you were doing the microtransit for employee shuttles, you were ahead of the game when you were doing that, right? When PG&E, and we can spend an episode talking about PG&E, but
Or
we won't.
2 or 3.
Right. And you should drink to that. We should all drink to that, right?
Yay, PG&E.
To having power.
They probably won't be a sponsor. But, when they were shutting off the grid and we all tried to say, look, you can't shut down the grid and impact so many residents. Like you had the conviction and the guts to do something, right? And again, not to criticize others, but like what gave you the confidence to say, again, you didn't come from a political family.
Correct.
You were corporate and then your dad told you, get off the fucking pot. What made you, how did you have that conviction though?
Pot is in pot, not pot is in cannabis.
I'm not
That's not what I'm
judging.
suggesting at that moment in time.
I'm not judging.
The conviction, I mean, what drives me, it drove me then and still drives me today, is doing what's right for the greatest good. And, Calistoga was disproportionately impacted by, obviously, wildfires, but also by the PSPSs, public safety power shutoffs.
Which I thought they were the right thing to do, by the way.
They were. I don't disagree. And
Let's give them credit.
In fairness to PG&E,
Yeah.
they're in a no-win situation.
Yeah.
You shut my power off, I don't like.
But it was the right thing to do at that time.
At that moment in time. But because we were so disproportionately impacted, that they had to find a different solution because we were at the end of the line, literally. And we just kept pressuring them and pushing them and pressuring them and guilting them. A side note, somebody from internal PG&E pretty high up told me during those years that I was known inside of PG&E as the pain in the ass mayor.
Not just PG&E.
Yeah, well, that's fair. But that's a title I'm happy to take on because at the end of the day, I was working to protect and benefit my community, which is what we all did in our respective roles. And what made my role and the work I did easier is knowing that there were other communities down Valley and other representatives, yourselves included, very much so, it was a team effort. There was our individual jurisdictions that we fought for, but also then there was the collective.
But
we were all there for
you guys should done though, right? Because I did the same thing, in my district when they were shutting off the grid, which I thought was the right thing to do, right?
Agreed.
But when they were shutting it off based off stations they had up on Atlas Peak and it was impacting, not just the place where I live, but 1,200 people in Silverado, I'm like, hey, look, you're pissing off 1,200 people, right? Because something's happening up on the hills. Like you have to find a way to do things differently. And I remember from you, it's like you work with people, you stay tenacious, you go at it, and they were able to create microgrids, right? And I think that's what always stood out from you is you didn't take no, you just kept going and going and going. I'm like, God damn, Chris, like you're gonna wear people out. And you did. But the benefactors of it were the people you represented in the city of Calistoga. So, not an attaboy, but like job well done, man. Because that's what the job is.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the press conference, it's measurable outcomes that make people's lives different.
Correct. Make it a better place for people to live, work, and play.
Yeah.
And that's what drove me.
So how has the transition been though? And we should all talk about it too, John, because you're doing your thing, right, as a consultant. How have you found the pivot from being in office to now being in the private sector again?
So I started in the private sector and went into the public sector, which was, there's a learning curve there, as we've all done.
Yeah. I love it.
The public sector or the private sector? Both. Good answer. And then I transitioned from public back into private. I put a lot in. I chose to make it my focus. I did have jobs during that period while I was the mayor for the 10 years. But coming out of it was, it's hard because you had responsibility and authority and opinions. Now all I have is opinions, whether you want them or not. But I knew myself and I knew that I couldn't just detach and be present in the community, not try to engage and involve or influence, if you will. So I chose to leave the community for a period of time. I left not just the community, but not just the state, but the country.
Was that intentional?
It was, very much so. I didn't want to be tempted with re-engaging. I chose not to run again. That was on me. the people elected, the residents elected their new body, and that's what they had, and they did, and I respected that. So I left, and I was fortunate to have the ability, the resources to go overseas for a year, and then stay away for another year. So for a total of 2 years, I was away from home, but coming back now.
What I think a lot of people either misunderstand or just don't appreciate is how 100% all in you are when you are the mayor of a small community. And I certainly experienced that. And it is similar, but there is a little bit of a difference when you're at the higher level, at the county level, and you have 130 plus thousand people to represent. I know they're districts, but still, it's the entire county that you're helping
Responsible
with
for, yeah.
It's a big job.
various things. It's a huge job. But people don't really appreciate how difficult it is and how draining it can be, even in the best moments. And so I know that you came from a small town and you could kind of find parallels with what the dynamics are, the community vibe, where you know almost everybody you're passing on the street, and when you go into a shop or whatever. But then you leave that, and the emails stop, and the calls stop, and there is that period of transition.
Yep, it's a real thing.
Yeah. So, how did you kind of manage that? Was there like an aha moment of, oh yeah, I'm not in office anymore. I keep checking my emails and nobody's emailing, or whatever it is. What was that kind of transition like for you? I know you physically relocated, but just kind of mentally also.
It is, because I did it similar to yourself. All three of us, we did it for an extended period of time.
Oh yeah.
And there was a lot that happened, and in a smaller community, you can't get away from it. In terms of you go to the grocery store, you go to down the street, you go to the library, you go to the churches. The last two of which I didn't frequent all that often, but I just had to throw them in there. Growing up Catholic, so my mom would be impressed. And you're going to see people, and there's no boundaries in a small community.
At all.
Yeah, in a small community, and I own it, and that's what I signed up
We
for.
chose
and that's what I did.
to
we did,
do that.
right?
Yeah.
So by removing myself, I physically extracted myself from that, and then it's a real thing when the phone calls become far fewer. Unfortunately, you guys kept calling me, and that was great. I really touched my heart deep, even though
There was a time zone difference.
Yeah, it was time. That's exactly it.
That's right.
Only 9 hours. And then the emails start to come off. And then you go through this period of, well, how do I help? What am I doing? Why aren't people asking my opinion? And some still were. But it was probably a good 6 months. 10 years boiled down to 6 months later. Then there was this huge relief that kind of came off. And I haven't intentionally stayed out of it, if you will, for almost 2 years. And I'm slowly coming back in. I may have re-engaged in a couple of things that I feel very strongly about. But it was, for me, it was intentional to get away and get far away for my own benefit, but also for
But I think I respect the fact that, look, we're all type A, right? Like we all led and wanted to lead. And if there's a problem, we ran into it. But I think we all recognize that once our time ended, it ended.
Yep.
Right. And I think you have to know that, right? And it's easy to get tempted by wanting to fix it. It's easy to, quarterback from the chair. And I don't think we should do that, right? Because you have to let them lead. Now, whoever's leading in the moment, they have to own it. Own the bus.
Correct.
Whether it's flying high or crashing and burning, it is your fucking bus, and you better own it, and you better not run away from it. Because we had to do that, right? And I think that's what's different about us is we had our moment in the sun. It's not our sun anymore. Now, there's other ways to help though, right? And I think that's where being a consultant, because all of us are doing that, how do you find that way to help, right? Because you still have that burn, you still have that itch and we've all dealt with it.
We're fixers. We want to fix it.
But how do you still fix it? And I think we're living in a moment where it's going to require a lot of different segments and a lot of different groups of people to make it work, right? The days of having that star politician, in my opinion, it's gone. And that's not criticism of the bodies of today. It's just a different moment. So you need strong industry groups. You need strong business. You need strong consultants. it's going to take a village. And I hate to say that term, but that's what because it's fucking complicated. Like think about social media. And I know you love Nextdoor, right? Sorry, I know you love Nextdoor, right? But like,
I think John and I share an opinion. Nextdoor.com, the worst thing to happen to democracy since democracy.
I just say where truth goes to die.
Oh, there's an even better
but
one.
like that's all the shit we're dealing with, right? So the game has fundamentally changed. And I think that's putting different pressures on the elected. So how do you govern from the outside, right? And still trying to be relevant, still trying to be helpful. Right?
Well, I can imagine because I felt similarly the last couple of years of my terms as mayor. The public discourse was different. It was
Very
starting
much so.
to become disrespectful and aggressive. And it's really continued and spiraled in a really negative way since we all left office. But I'm curious, when you think back 12 years when you were first elected and the dynamics, again, in a very small community, it's magnified because of the personalness of that kind of leadership in a small community. How did you see it transition over your 12 years, especially those 10 years as mayor?
In the early years that I was elected, there was definitely more opportunity and people were open to discussion, conversations, compromise. Compromise, I have to give a little, you give a little, we come to a middle ground. As time evolved, and you were going to see people, you're going to run into them in Calmar in the grocery store or walking down the street. As time evolved, and I will say the great accelerator was just before COVID, when some of the national politics changed, and then certainly during COVID, people pretty much lost their minds. And they were mimicking the behavior that they saw at the national level locally. And to have, neighbors and in some cases friends come up to the podium and just say things that you would look at and say, oh my God, you just said that, you'd think to yourself. And then as they're continuing, you're like, oh my God, they really believe this. And going on, but not being willing to stick around to have a discussion about it, kind of the drop the mic moments. And it just got, and when somebody comes up there and they say something that's, disrespectful or just downright rude or wrong, at times I would say, I'm going to see you in the grocery store. I'm going to see you on the street. Let's talk about this versus just having
But to your point though, Chris, I think, or Christopher,
Chris, thank you. I'm not in trouble yet that I'm aware of. There's time though.
I think the pandemic really changed the psyche of people, right? And thinking about what the pandemic did, right? Like when we were doing social distancing and no gathering and you saw your neighbor have more than one car, it's like, do I report him or not? It became this social policing and I must report you. And I think it put people at odds with one another. Yep. And I wasn't accountable. I didn't look you in the eye and say, hey, why do you have more than your car there? What are you doing that's endangering my family? I have a sick mother, a sick dad, or a sick... Like we lost that social contact.
Agreed.
And I think we're seeing the ramifications of that. And I remember, I was coaching soccer and I had this, this kid that he was a pandemic baby and he had no social skills. I'm like, holy hell! These are the impacts. And I think we're still seeing the impacts of that, right? Because people are willing to do harm to you without knowing you. And I think that's changing. And we got to go back to I'm glad you asked the question of how was it different then? I think what you said is hey, I'm going to see you in the grocery store and I'm going to talk to you. And I'm going to, exactly. Right? But I'm not seeing that anymore. Right. And it's not that it's yesterday was better. We can't be saying, we're just a bunch of old guys talking, not old. Some of us are old, but
wow, that wasn't you, John, was it?
I can handle it.
It was a general direction. Right.
Broad shoulders.
Exactly. Some would say, but we have to go back to the fundamentals. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're missing a little bit of that. But a question for you though, man, when you were traveling and you were in Europe, was it different or was it all the same?
It was the same in terms of people's attitudes, but they're more, I found people to be a little bit more respectful. It was helpful not knowing the language. Because
when you told me you lived in a freaking village in France, I'm and you get the newspaper once a week, I'm that's pretty cool. It sounds refreshing.
Disconnect.
Very off the grid.
And if someone's yelling at me in French, I'm like, hey.
The universal sign.
I think while I was there, the whole world was going through that change. And we all shared coming out of the pandemic. Certain countries, states, towns handled differently. But there was some of that dynamic, but I will have to say, having lived there for a period of time and then obviously lived here, the politics in the U.S. became much more toxic much faster.
But do you think that's intentional, though? I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in getting into, you referenced earlier about, the branding of politicians or the showmanship of politicians, the performative nature of some of them now. That's what you see. Some of that is happening locally, but I think that's a reflection of what's happening nationally
It's
as
systemic,
well.
though.
Exactly. Very much systemic. And I don't care what side of the fence or aisle you're on, left,
Agreed.
right, blue, red, whatever the case may be. We're all responsible for not being more compromising or willing to compromise on that.
So to that point, right? Like we've talked about some meaty issues: immigration, DEI, keyboard warriors, and like when we're doing this, like we're sensitive to like we're gonna get criticized for this because to your point, it's hard to have a conversation now, though, right? Before you get canceled or you get targeted. So I know you're a big fan of this podcast, right? So like
almost every episode,
clearly, but like we're talking about these big issue topics, right? And I think people need to talk about them, though, right? So like, give us your perspective on kind of these things that we all need to talk about, but like you can't even talk about them with your family because it causes division, right? And we talked about DEI, and some of my family members listened to it, and I got some criticism. I'm like, well, it's what I believe, but it's okay, right? Yeah. But you're seeing a little bit of that, like it's these off-limit issues, and I think that's a disservice.
Well, it's the divide and conquer, and if I drive a wedge on a particular issue, whether it be DEI or immigration or whatever the case may be, we have to divide to conquer. The two-party system we have, and in theory, at local politics in the state of California, you're not supposed to declare. Okay, so but the entire time I ran as mayor, you never declare.
Are you serious?
Yeah, there's nowhere on our ballots does it say whether you're a D or an R.
So you never.
No, I mean you could look up my affiliation, but you don't. I think the same as in Yountville. On your ballot doesn't say John Dunbar D or R. It's John Dunbar mayor.
What?
The local elections are nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan. I'm surprised that you're surprised by that.
I am. Maybe it explains my cost per vote.
Yeah.
Some of the highest in Napa County.
And I think the closer you get, all politics, the cliche, all politics is local.
Yeah.
It's reality because that's where you're touching people where they live, work, and play, and you're the closest to it. And when that started to become down to this, let's divide and conquer, and then it becomes every issue, people want to do that. And then the keyboard cowboys or warriors and you run into somebody in the grocery store who you know how they feel online, and then when you try to have that conversation with them at the salad bar, they're freaking out. It's just, I think that the system we have, the two-party system we have, which is infiltrated by money, or I should say, tainted by money.
Yeah.
It's where we're ending up, and it is very unfortunate to see it so prevalent, so close to home now.
Yeah.
That it's going to take a very long cycle. And the three of us served, we were fortunate to overlap. That's how we became friendly and worked together. That was a moment in time where our style, certainly my style, wouldn't fit right now. But, some of the heavy lifting had to be done. There were people before us that did different heavy lifting. It is hard to stand on the sidelines and not want to engage. But now, I'm a constituent. I'm a resident. I can share my opinions. And I don't have responsibility or authority, as mentioned earlier, so I can say what I want. But I also respect the fact that whoever's sitting in that chair up at that dais as the mayor or the city council member, we know how hard that role is.
And it's their chair.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. The people have decided.
Alfredo asked me a question first podcast when we were talking about
I don't remember.
our past careers as electeds. If I would run again today, knowing what's happening today with public discourse and the way government is seen and the way it's maybe not really efficient, would you, I'm not saying run again, but would that stop you from going after it if this was something new to you and you had the opportunity like you did 14 years ago?
If you were a young Christopher Canning.
I'm still young, ish. I'm not as young as you, Alfred. Oh, I said I wasn't going to make a young joke.
Dude, why are you making fun of my age?
I'm jealous. I recently had someone say to me that it's my responsibility now that I'm coming back to run again. And my point very
Wow.
clearly was, it's not my responsibility. I served my time at a point in time. It's now someone else's responsibility to do that. To get to your question, would I run again, understanding what the discourse is today? It wouldn't scare me to run again. I don't know that I'd run locally again.
That's a teaser.
I'll
Canning
leave it
for
at that.
governor.
No.
So let me
No.
tell you that though, because I do think you had a unique skill set, right? That you walked that tightrope very well, and I mean that as a compliment, right? You got a lot of things done.
I was waiting for the punchline there.
No, there is none. But why is it people like you aren't staying in government and running for higher jobs? Because not jobs, but it's a calling, right? Like 'cause you were naturally good at it, and I have the same feeling about you, John. Right? You were good at it, and people benefited from it, but you got out. So would you ever want to run for something greater than mayor?
I think, well, first of all, there's no job greater than mayor.
Agreed.
Okay, there.
Quite obvious.
Mayors rule the world.
Get over
Okay,
the
there we go.
statement, please.
In my future, I see, and where I have the most passion, I see myself getting back into some form of public service.
I love that.
And that could be working for a nonprofit, working for an advocacy agency. The running for office again, the higher up you go, and sorry to say this to the friends and colleagues we have who are in offices above us, the higher up you go, candidly, the filthier it gets because of the intrusion of money and the requirement and the expense involved in running for an office. I mean, what did a campaign cost you in the county of Napa with 130,000 people? How much?
$400,000.
Okay, that's obscene
It's
and
crazy.
absurd.
It's ludicrous.
Yeah, and every level up you go from there,
more expensive.
our local congressman, the poor guy has to raise money every single day
Yeah.
because he runs every 2 years, and people don't just, not everybody contributes to a campaign because they think you're a great guy or gal. People contribute because at the end of the day, they feel they might have access.
Yeah.
And I spent some time in the UK when I was in university, and they have a great system where everybody who's who is running for a seat has the same amount of money issued by the government, and the campaign period is a very short and fast window. I think that Citizens United was the worst decision that the Supreme Court could have ever made. Well, until a more recent one. But the public discourse doesn't scare me. It's the fact that it's just filthy, and I think I can serve differently or better.
But to your point, though, Chris, like I agree with you that the access issue, but then if you don't have money directly to candidates, you have political action committees, which are just as bad.
Agreed.
So then it becomes a game system, right? And to me, that's the problem. So kind of maybe a curveball here. I came into this job when I was elected thinking that term limits were bad. And I kind of came around to saying, I think term limits are good. And I say that because I think sometimes when you stay too long, you're tied to wanting to stay in office versus the outcomes you're trying to create. Now, you lose a lot of institutional knowledge when you do that. But I think that's part of the system, though, right? It's because once you stay in office, and then you have to go fundraise for whatever organization you're in. So it becomes a self-sustaining system versus, hey, you're here, you have a job to do. Go do it and then get the hell out. And I think our system is very different than other countries.
I like John's perspective on this because my feeling is that the closer you are, the smaller the community or office jurisdiction you're in, the far more difficult it is to have term limits because you have the same number of hats needing to be worn, you have fewer heads to put them on. And I think if you and there were some people in Calistoga that wanted to instill term limits after my third term. The reality is there aren't a lot of people who are
fair point.
Yeah, you need people who are willing and you need people who are competent. And you don't always have the willing who are competent. You don't always have the competent who are willing to run. And I mean, similar in your experience in Yountville?
One of the things there are many things that the general public does not appreciate about local government, whether it's at the county level or the city, town level, especially at the local level with us. You're not doing it for the money.
I can assure you of that.
So many people feel like, politicians, it's a power thing and it's a money thing.
But for some it is.
But people often would be great elected officials, they cannot literally afford to run for office because the time commitment to do it well means sometimes you can't have children that you're raising. You can't have a job that you can't leave to go to. I mean, how many meetings do we have every week or every month? Middle of the afternoon. I mean, not everybody can get out of jobs to do that.
Yeah.
And so you're already losing a large population of qualified people. And then you have to have a skill set of quality, your capability to manage who knows what on any given day, and have the skill set to communicate. And, there are a lot of personal characteristics to be an effective leader that people don't always pay attention to. They just think, oh, somebody spent a bunch of money and they ran and they won, and that's all it takes.
They're talking about me.
I didn't hear him say your name, to be honest.
I'll
But what it takes to be a really good leader for a community at whatever level, it's more the intangibles, and they sometimes are the things that people pay the least attention to.
But look, I kind of want to disagree with both of you though, because I do think, yes, when it's a smaller community, right, there's less people to pick from, but it's kind of creating a culture shift of public and civic service has to be part of life, and it has to be part of the way of life. And you don't need a Chris Canning or a John Dunbar to save Yampa or Calistoga. It should be part of how this community gets created. And I think when I hear term limits, I get your concern, but then it's letting people off the hook, right? And to me, if you want to create a special town or a special city, everyone has to own it. Everyone has to be accountable to it. And right now, I think we're seeing a lot of free riders that just want to ride the greatness and not own it, right? And we all remember in school, right? Like you had the person that didn't want to contribute in a project, and then 2 or 3 did the work. You got to break away from that. And I think other countries do it differently, where they don't. It's not a race to the bottom. It's like it's a race to the top. And I think we're flirting with a little bit of like, it's okay to let some do the work and others come along. And I think we have to challenge ourselves, because I guarantee you, what's the population of Calistoga?
Documented 5,200.
Okay. You're telling me that there's not 5 talented people of the 5,200. I bet there is, but they're not involved though, Chris.
Right.
And they're choosing not to be involved.
Well, when you think about the fact that, and I believe it's similar in Yountville, so I ran for 5 terms. 3 of those were unopposed. And
some would say because you were doing a good job.
Well, sure, we can say that. I firmly believe that in a democracy, a healthy democracy, no position should ever be unopposed. And how many times did you have boards or commissions or committees that you couldn't find people to serve on? And, people wanted to put term limits on our planning commission. There are years we can't even find enough people to fill seats.
But so
would you leave them vacant?
But so I hear you on that, right? And that to me is a symptom of a not engaged community. And I know that's a big issue to move, right? But that's what creates communities, right? When it's engaged. Like when you think about after the earthquake, after the fires, what made it so unique? People pulling up and figuring it out, right? When we did the food drives after the pandemic or during the pandemic, it was people stepping in. So they have the talent, but what's causing them from wanting to step in? Because they think someone else is going to do it.
Well, and I think a big factor nowadays is the abuse you take.
I was just going to say, reiterate what you said
I
earlier.
can speak in spades to that, but
of course, that is a very real deterrent. So many people.
Agreed.
When I was running for supervisor, so basically 2022, they're like, why do you want to do this? And it was obvious. People saw that it was almost disgusting how members of the public were treating public health officers, elected officials,
staff, team.
Yeah. And people were making decisions to not participate because they didn't want to take the abuse. And it's unfortunate that it devolved to that level. It should be something that many people want to do because it is serving community. But the realities of the dynamics are also, they're real. The time commitment, the commitment of energy, and the impact on your personal life. Those are very real things. And it is a calling. It isn't just a job. Yeah. And to do it well, it really has to be something that you kind of are ready to sacrifice in order to do it well.
Yeah. And when I get referred to as a politician, I quickly correct people because I'm a resident, a local that got elected to make a contribution to the community. And I was, prior to you just making that point, John, I was going to say the exact same thing. Because of the politics we have in our country, both nationally and very much locally, why would you want to run?
But what I will say also, when I was able to go to your final meeting as mayor, and then afterwards going down to Calistoga Inn for the after party, and seeing how many residents came to thank you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make it all good, all the stuff that you have to deal with over the years, but it is a reminder of the joy of the job, the value of the job. And it's very personal to give yourself to your community. I commend you for the many years that you served Calistoga and were a great partner for us and our colleagues, because we did go through some shit in that decade plus, more than anyone could have imagined, really. But I think our community was better for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to say, I think I would feel the same ways. As many of the challenges as we had and problems we may have encountered and some uncivilized people, at the end of the day, I look back and I feel I did the best I could. I think I helped, and I will always look back. It was the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life and the most rewarding thing at the same time. And I look back with just overall positive.
And I think on that point, though, to me, the purpose, right? Like the satisfying nature of the purpose of what you get by helping people, helping a community, that's priceless. And that's cliche to say, but to me, I think that's what, reflecting back now that we're out of it, is it was meaningful because you had so much opportunity to better the lives of people, right? So, and I know we're going to wrap up, but
go ahead.
I do want to ask, Chris, do you miss it?
There are elements of it I do miss. Yeah, absolutely. It's people in Calistoga are amazing. And even I'll say I was having lunch with some friends today right down the street from your office here in downtown Napa. The furthest point I could be almost in the county from my
it can be American. It can be American Canyon.
Okay, but we're the furthest from the county seat. American closer. And people walking by who just stop to say hi because they recognize me or that I've known. And in Calistoga itself, I do miss I still get called the mayor though, which is kind of cool. But I loved overall the time I served. I love the community. I love the people, most of them. And it was time well served. And I loved serving with you guys alongside.
He still talks like a politician.
I'm not. I'm a local that got elected.
Well, I'm not sure we are allowed to toast using a non-alcoholic beverage, but
he's the problem. We should be drinking more wine, dude.
I know I'm ruining the whole industry.
But
I'm helping support the cannabis
in
industry.
your honor, cheers to you. Thank you for being our first guest and a longtime friend, and looking forward to many more years of your friendship.
Cheers, and thanks to both of you for having me on.
Cheers. Alfredo, what did you think of our first ever guest appearance for our podcast?
Well, let me start with the wine. It's Merlot. I'm not a fan, just to be clear. But look, I thought Chris did a great job. The fact that he's a friend, right? But I think to me, John, like, we all did good work. And I respect both of you, right? For the fact that we were in the trenches when the cameras weren't around. But we got a lot of shit done. And I think people got to hear from him a little bit more, right? In terms of why he did it, how he did it. And I was a little intrigued, the fact that he still wants to be involved, right? I think that's admirable, right? That's not fake, that's real. Like, the guy cares. He's traveled the world. I got to see him in Switzerland, like I told you. But he's still coming back to this place because I think he cares about it.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the similarities to Chris's service and ours. Not only do we overlap in the years and some of the things that we had to deal with, but the commitment to community, it's critical to be really successful as an elected leader in a community.
Well, and I think, people have said, there's a bromance between you and I, but the fact that they got to see someone else as a friend, right, that we're not in the business of being in politics anymore, but we're friends, out of office, I think that goes to show you how you can still do work with people and still be friends afterwards, because the jobs never defined us, right? It was the mission we were on to get shit done, and we did it, and no one can take that away from us.
And I hope that the folks that are in office now that are leading our community can have that same kind of rapport and friendship, because I know it made me a better elected having the trust and friendship of you, Chris, and many other colleagues.
I won't say this, but the world would be better off if we had more Christopher Cannings or John Dunbars in the world, right? That were out there doing their thing, and it was selfless, right? Like, you didn't do it for the pay, as you all said. You did it because you cared, right? So even though this is Merlot, I'm gonna cheers to you, and I'm gonna bring the wine next time.
Well, because I love Merlot, and also I love having been, as Chris was,
Christopher,
in the most important role in local government was being a mayor. Come on, let's toast to that.
if that's what gets you going, go
Cheers.
ahead. Cheers.